Welcome and welcome back, party people. Appreciate you tuning in again or tuning in for the first time. But my name's Chris, I'm a freelance photographer, and let's talk about today's video. Zoom lenses versus prime lenses. And so for those of you who are coming back and have viewed other videos on my channel, I'm gonna try to be as biased in this kind of comparison, or unbiased as possible, because for those of you who've seen my other videos, I don't really talk about zoom lenses. The only zoom lens that I have really talked about on this channel outside of the Sigma 18-55, which I no longer own, is a more recent video, which is my Sony 24-50 G lens. And I say that I want to be unbiased because I'm not somebody who really likes to use zoom lenses. I am much more a prime lens person. For the most part, I've always been that way. I've owned probably a handful of zoom lenses in my time shooting photography, and to be perfectly honest, other than my Sony 24-50, I just don't use them frequently at all, and I haven't in the past. So I do want to start out with zoom lenses on that note, because I feel like it's important to own a zoom lens before you dive into the world of primes. And let's break that down, why I think that is. So zoom lenses, as I pick this up, because it's my only example that I have, zoom lenses are more often than not the beginning of somebody's photography journey, as well as often the end of someone's photography journey in the sense of professional photography, right? And the reason I say that on the beginning half is because if you look at any time you're picking up your first camera, and I say that as an interchangeable lens camera or just a point and shoot camera, if you buy a kit for an interchangeable lens camera, 99% of the time, the kit lens is a zoom lens. And that's because it's often coming as a, hey, here is a lens that's coming as a combo because we want to give you the most versatility in choosing ultimately what you want to shoot. And, oftentimes those cheaper zoom lenses, like an example, the 28-70, I think, from Sony, which is like 3.5 to 5.6, depending on how far you're zoomed out. And, I know Fuji often has like the 16-80, which is, stops down to f4. They're gonna have a higher aperture and ultimately be slower, but they are more versatile. And then on the flip side of that, when you get into the more professional photography, especially weddings and events, you see these zoom lenses because of the fact that they'll have a much faster aperture. I mean, Sony and Canon both have, the 24-70 f2, and then Sony just released the 50 to, I want to say 150 f2. Those lenses are zoom lenses with almost prime level apertures. And on the flip side of that, those lenses are also like $3,000 to $4,000. So they're not really your entry point, figure out what you like. They have a very intended purpose. And so that's why I think it is always very important to start with a zoom lens, because it allows you the flexibility for figuring out what you want. And that's very important when you're starting a photography journey, because you're gonna find yourself in different situations. You want that flexibility, and a zoom lens gives you that flexibility 100%. They can be shorter zooms, like my 24-50. A lot are 24-70. Some, I know Fuji, on the other hand, has like an 18-135. They can be very expansive in the ranges. And then when going from when you're starting out to the more professional level, they do have those very set, ranges. And I know the 24-70s are often because they allow you to have a very wide angle shot and keep a constant aperture. And they also get into that portrait world, where you're getting in that 50-70 range ultimately for portraits. So they have a wide range of utility, and I think that's very important. Why do I only own one zoom lens? And that's because I wanted to get something for video for Sony, which is, I actually end up using it for photo more than I do video, but I got this combo because it does pair, this lens pairs very well with my A7C II, and it's not an overly cumbersome zoom, but it gives me some flexibility, and ultimately with a constant aperture of f2.8, that performs on the level of some primes. I mean, that gives me the speed that I want to have, and it's not over the top cumbersome. And ultimately, when I'm doing different types of shoots, I like to have a zoom lens on hand because it gives me some more flexibility if I need it. So why do people choose zooms? Flexibility, as well as learning, figuring out what you want. And that actually gives me the perfect segue into prime lenses, where prime lenses, and of course I'm going to be using, just to dramatize the effect, I'm going to be using this 35mm, which is actually a manual lens. I've reviewed this. This is the 7 Artisans 35. Why do I prefer prime lenses overall? One, I absolutely obsess over nice bokeh, or just bokeh in general. I love the, the depth separation that you can get with a very wide open aperture. So, most of my primes are between 1.4 and f2. That is, I've had some 1.2s in the past. I'd love to get a 0.95 just because I know there's some lenses that you can get that are absolutely incredible. The bokeh and background separation are just wild, but also they're very good in low light. You don't find that on a lot of zoom lenses because it's very, very hard to replicate something like that where you need that fast of an aperture and keep that constant with a zoom lens. But for me personally, I had started out with a zoom lens on my first Canon. It gave me some flexibility, but I found myself just, it sounds so basic, but I found myself just shooting at one focal length at all time and just moving back and forth and changing what I wanted to do. So I ended up getting my first prime, which was the Nifty 50 1.8 from Canon, and that was for my DSLR cameras. I used that lens, once I bought it, I used that lens for everything until I got the 1.4, and even the 1.4 was, I didn't like it as much as the 1.8, so I ended up using the 1.8 a little bit more, but I just used that lens for everything. It allowed me to get more creative. It allowed me to move around, change my subject. And by giving myself those limitations when shooting, it allowed me to become a better photographer because I was just fixed on what my field of view was, but I could also get those low light, just wide open shots, which was fantastic. And because of that, I also ended up doing a lot more product and like food photography where I wasn't doing group shoots. And so I found a lot of use for that very blurry background separation, getting really nice bokeh. That's what I was in the use case for. So it worked out for me to kind of err on the side of using prime lenses because it just made product photography and food photography look incredible. You really just got to focus on your subject and took away everything else. So I end up using primes more often than not, and as I've continued to get more and more into photography overall, because I do a lot less videography, this is really the most extent in terms of YouTube of what I do for videography. That's where I found my sweet spot. And I absolutely love, I've found myself, especially with my Fujis, and I do have some for Sony. I mean, my Sony lens that I'm shooting on right now is just actually a Viltrox lens. That's a 20mm 2.8, which that's absolutely fine for videos. I'd love to get, either the 20 or the 16 1.8, or there's also the 24 1.4, I believe. I would love to get my hands on one of those lenses, but not in the budget right now. The only other lens I have for Sony I don't have a lot of lenses for Sony, but I have a 40mm f2, which I like that faster speed and I like that focal length. So I've found myself, especially when it comes to Fuji, with the APS-C crop, and this is something important to note for primes, is that when you have a prime lens, If it's full frame, you're just getting face value. If you have an APS-C or crop sensor camera, that prime is actually 1.5 times on average what you're going to be getting. So because I love the 50mm focal length, I typically shoot between 40 and 52 roughly on what my cameras are. Most of my Fuji lenses, and at this point, all of the Fuji lenses that I own, or lenses for Fuji, are 35mm, which is wild because I have 3 35mm lenses, which actually comes out to about 52.5 when you get down to the full frame focal length. That 50mm length is my absolute favorite. It is as real world as I want to get. It's my favorite length to shoot at, and it's great for both street photography, subject or product photography, as well as portraits. So it gives me the versatility of these subjects that I like to shoot, but I didn't learn that until I found myself constantly shooting at that length on a zoom lens first. So, now I have my 7 Artisans, which is my cheaper 35mm for Fuji. I have my Thighpoc, which is also a 35, a 1.4, a 1.4, and then I have one autofocus lens for Fuji right now, which is the 35 f2. That's my personal favorite. That's why I often stick with primes. And when it comes down to it, more often than not, unless I need a wider field of view, when I'm shooting on this Sony lens, this caps out at 50. This is primarily the length that I use this lens at. If I need to get a little bit wider, great. I have, 24 and I can zoom it out. But all things considered, I wouldn't have gotten where I am with all my prime lenses if I didn't start with a zoom. So while I personally like prime lenses, I will always say start with a zoom, figure out what you like, and if you like a wider lens, great. They're like for Fuji or Sony, Canon, there are wider lenses like the 16s and the 20 and the 24, and Fuji has the 23 and the 18, which you can multiply on your own. But figure out what you want by experimenting with zoom lenses before you buy your first prime. And that is where I'll end this video. So as always, drop a comment below if you disagree. I'd love to hear why. I mean, this is solely my opinion, so I have no problem admitting when I'm wrong or just taking input from anybody else. And if you agree with me, that's cool too. Appreciate you tuning in. If you're new here, once again, click that subscribe button. Would love to have you continue on the journey with me here, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.